Hey filmmakers, how's it going tonight? Thank you guys for joining me on another live stream, another late night live stream. We're going to have a good time tonight. We're going to be talking about 10 tips to improve your camera skills, and we're going to focus on a handful of newbie beginner mistakes that you need to avoid. So we all start out as complete amateurs, myself included, and I'm still learning all the time. Every single day I'm learning something new when it comes to videography and lighting and everything like that. So we're going to focus on, like I said, 10 different things and lay them out as we go. Things that will help you improve and make better looking videos and images. So if you have questions or comments, please start leaving them below in the chat and I'll be really happy to answer them with you guys. It's always fun to hang out with you guys. It's a great community. The filmmaking community is seriously the best community around. So please start asking me your questions as we jump into this. And if you guys are having any issues hearing me or with the delay or anything like that, please let me know in the comments and I'll make sure to get it fixed. So let's just jump right into it. So what is the number one thing that I see a lot of amateurs do? So one thing that I see happen all the time is people go handheld too soon. So when I started doing filmmaking and doing videos, unfortunately, you just kind of pick up the camera and you start walking around with it and videoing like you do with a normal camera to go and take pictures, but you don't realize how absolutely crazy and shaky that footage is. So I recommend, if you're just getting started off, film on a tripod. Tripod, you can see here. That is one of my number one tips for starting off, because if you are trying to go fully handheld, it's likely that you're using a small mirrorless or DSLR camera and it's gonna get a lot of shakes and a lot of jitters on that little sensor. So it takes years to really get down going fully handheld with your camera, and I'm just getting more and more comfortable with it, and I've been doing this for quite some time now, but I'm just getting more comfortable with it, and I've been doing video for about 7 years now, so it takes a lot of practice. So I recommend starting off on a tripod. You can get beautiful footage just locked off, stable, practice your framing and everything like that. It'll be a smart thing, a smart way to start. I see a couple of you guys jumping in the chat. What's up, SD? What's up, Anmol? He says, how can we start our career in filmmaking? That's a great question. The best way to start is just start making videos for friends and family members for free. Right off the bat, that's what I do, is just make a couple and just start building that portfolio. And as you build it more, you can start charging for your work, and then you just keep going up and up from there. If you really want to get into filmmaking on sets, the best way to do that is to get on set and just do anything you can. Usually as a PA, you're grabbing drinks for people, you're doing errands and things like that. That's one of the best ways if you want to start on sets, as opposed to just starting as your own videographer or DP on, your own indie shoots and such. What's up, Jan? Thanks again for joining the live stream. You have been jumping into a lot of these lately. Appreciate the support. All right, let's see. A couple more questions in here. SD says, should I go to film school? That's totally up to you. For me, I would not recommend going to film school. It's very expensive. And I've met a lot of film students that come out, and most of them are not very impressive. Their skills are usually weak, and sometimes, take that with a grain of salt. Sometimes their skills are really good, but usually they come out being only able to be really good at like one thing. So maybe they learned lighting, or maybe they learned about the gear side, or maybe they learned audio really well, but they're usually not super well rounded. I find it's better to just practice this stuff over and over and learn from books and videos and tutorials and other people that are already in the industry. Film school, for me, I don't think is really worth it in this day and age when you have the internet and free resources. There's so many great courses that you can learn from. All right, so we've got a couple more questions coming in here, and I'll try and answer these kind of throughout as I talk about these 10 tips and everything. Before I answer the next questions in here, let's get to the next tip here. So the number 2 thing that I see a lot of newbies do, a mistake, is changing the shutter speed to change their exposure. So you want to keep that 180 degree shutter roll. So you're probably familiar with this already, but let's say you're shooting in 24 frames per second. You want your shutter speed to be twice that, at 1/48th or 1/50th shutter speed. That will allow you to have a nice normal motion blur instead of it looking jittery and choppy. I see a lot of newbies that come from doing photography. They change their shutter speed and they just bump it up so they get the proper exposure. Say it's really sunny outside, and they change it up to like 1/200th or 1/300th or higher so that they can get the proper exposure, but still have that nice shallow depth of field, with a wide open lens. Well, it ends up looking really choppy, and I'll see a lot of new videographers do this, especially wedding filmmakers, because they're like, oh, I can do photography, I could also do video. But they don't realize that, hey, it's okay in photography to change your shutter speed. It's not okay in video to really change your shutter speed most of the time. Most of the time you want to keep it at double the frame rate. So if you're in 30 frames per second, shoot at 1/60th. And if you're shooting slow motion at 60 frames, shoot at 120 shutter speed. So that's one cardinal mistake I see all the time in footage. So you'll see it being kind of jittery and just too crisp without that motion blur that you see here in my hand. So that's a mistake you definitely want to avoid. And it's something, honestly, that personally, when I first started out, I didn't realize. I didn't know. No one told me, hey, keep the 180 degree shutter roll. I think there were a lot of videographers that weren't even doing that. So I fell victim to changing the shutter speed when I first started out, until I realized this rule about motion blur. So something to keep in mind. All right. PS Films, what's up? He says, did you ever shoot a wedding? If you had, give a quick tip, please. Yes, I have shot many weddings. They're not my favorite thing to do, but they give you a lot of really good experience, especially shooting long days, which typically, if you're going to be doing filmmaking, you're going to be shooting 10, 12, 15-hour days sometimes, because you go from morning till late at night when the sun has set. So I think it's a great experience, and it also teaches you that you have to have your stuff together and be ready to get the shot, because you only get one chance to get it. If you miss the couple cutting the cake or throwing the flowers or whatever it is, you're in big trouble. So you got to make sure you're rolling and all your settings are dialed in and you're framed up nice and you have good lighting and everything like that. So I think they're a great learning ground. But for me personally, it's not where I want to do most of my filmmaking, because for me, it's more of just like kind of documenting what happened. Whereas I like to create some sort of a story and a narrative or a commercial if I can. But a quick tip for wedding filmmaking, I would say, if you can, power your camera with something that can power it all day long. So you're not switching out batteries or having it die in the middle of a ceremony or in the middle of an important event. Try and power your camera on a V-mount battery if you can, or a power bank. I just made an entire video that you can go check out about the new Fujifilm X-T4, where we power that camera off of a power bank that lasts about 6 hours of continuous shooting. So depending on your day, you could run all day on that. So that's a quick tip. Try and just run on 1, maybe 2 batteries all day, so you're not worrying about swapping those out and recharging them in the middle of the day, trying to find somewhere to charge at a venue or when you're out and about. All right. And thank you guys for these questions. I love interacting with you guys, so keep them coming. All right. What's up, Mini Ovar Matr? He says, what's the best way to get $1,000 as a videographer? That's a great question. Yeah, $1,000. At first, when you start doing video work, that seems like a lot of money, and it's like, man, I can't charge my client that. Like, that's scary. But once you start doing this, you'll find that $1,000 is really nothing. It's a good amount for maybe a day rate if you're coming on to go shoot something as part of a team, and you're going to be running the camera. Hey, my day rate's $1,000. That's not bad. But I guess the best way to say that, how would you make $1,000 would be to, when you have a client come to you asking for something, whether they're asking you to come out and film, some talking head for their website or a little ad for social media or something, just create a bid and show them, how this is going to cost you $1,000. Hey, it's going to cost me this much to rent my own equipment, which you can do. Say, hey, I have a camera, lights. Well, that package is $350 for me to bring my equipment. And then $400 of editing time, and the rest of it, $250 or whatever for shooting. I mean, obviously those numbers are a little skewed, but that's a really easy estimate to send out to a client. $1,000. It's easy to justify that in a couple line items, just saying it's going to cost this, this, this. And always, I'll make a whole video about this in the future, but always charge them for hard drive space. You're going to have to save that footage forever. I have so many clients come back to me years and years and years later saying, hey, do you have that video? We wanted to make some updates or changes to it. And it's like 5 years later, and you're like, where is that? Where did I put that? Do I still have it? And usually you do. It's just stacked away in some hard drive they build up. So make sure you're charging them for a hard drive to keep their footage on forever, because they're going to expect you to have it later on down the road when really you're not obligated to. So anyways, a couple things. I'm going to make a whole video about that in the future, about kind of charging clients and that sort of thing. It's a really fun topic, because I'm a business major. I went to business school. I did not go to film school. So I love talking about the business side of it. If you have more questions like that, keep them coming. All right. Brown Guy Made IT. He says, I've shot one wedding, never again, too stressful. Yeah, I can agree with you there. They're very stressful. It's like nonstop, high pace for 10 hours or more a day on your feet. And if you miss something, it's very stressful. And you're like, ooh, we didn't get that. Or if someone walks in the way, someone that's attending the wedding stands right in front of your shot, or their head gets in the way, very stressful. Keep checking out some questions here. Johnny D, what's up, man? He says, do you have any color grading tips? I actually just made an entire video all about color grading on this channel. It's the last video that I made on the channel, so you guys are gonna you're gonna wanna go check that out, Johnny. I'll leave a link to it. Let me grab that for you real quick, and I think it's something that could definitely help you out. It's color grading in Final Cut Pro 10 and using Color Finale. So if you use a different program, some of the tips will apply to you there, but if you use Premiere or something, they're not going to be super helpful for you. All right. Keep answering a couple of your questions here, and then I want to keep going on our tips here. So PS Films, he says, can you give some tips about starting in filmmaking as a teen? Yeah, so if you're a teenager and you just want to get into filmmaking, that's a fantastic time to do it. I started way later in life. Started working with the camera later in life. So if you're a teenager interested in this, you're way ahead of the curve. If you're watching this kind of stuff and interested, you're going to do fantastic. So I would say make stuff with your friends. All your friends are young, have all the time in the world, especially with what's going on in the world right now. If it's safe to be around them and they're healthy and well or whatever, then you can get together and make little short films and just make things for fun. Make whatever you want, whatever you think of, stupid things, action things, funny skits, whatever, and just practice getting a good shot, getting good audio, and editing. That's all I could say, is just get together with your friends and make as many little dumb videos as you can. And you don't have to post them anywhere, or you could just post them on YouTube. They're probably not going to get a lot of views, but it helps you see how you've improved over the months and years. So just make things. I wish I started when I was a kid in high school. I would be much better than I am now. So, all right. So we're going to move on to our next tip here, the third tip. This is soft shots that are out of focus. So that's a big mistake that I see a lot of newbies make, is that their shots just aren't sharp. And this can be easily avoided if you simply just punch in and check your focus. So just about every DSLR out there allows you to basically digitally zoom in on the LCD, and you can just see if the eyes are sharp. If you're shooting a person, if you're filming a person, you want the eyes, the windows to the soul to be the sharpest, because that's where everyone's looking when they're watching your videos. They're watching the people's eyes for the most part. And if you get those in focus, nice and sharp, everything else in the face will pretty much be sharp as well. So punch in and make sure it's sharp. When I first started out, actually it was on a wedding that I was shooting with a client with another videographer team. And my focus was actually soft on, I think it was on the bride or the groom that I was filming. And later on, they're like, man, it was so soft. We had to add a bunch of sharpening in post-production. Why didn't you zoom in? And I was like, I didn't even think about it. So now always zoom in, make sure it's sharp, and then, zoom back out digitally. Don't zoom in the lens unless you have a parfocal lens, then you could zoom in and out and check your focus. So anyways, that's a big mistake that I see a lot of people make. So just make sure your image is sharp, and it's really helpful if you're using a monitor. If you have something like a 5-inch monitor, this is the Atomos Ninja V or Ninja 5 as everyone officially calls it. This really helps you get sharp images. It took me probably a year or two before I even bought an external monitor. I started out shooting on the Canon Rebel T3i, and I was not using an external monitor, but as soon as I started using one, it really helped me get focus, get good framing, and get proper exposure. So that's a huge tip that you're really, if you don't have one, I highly recommend picking one up. You can get them pretty cheap, and I made a bunch of videos on my channel about that too, so you can check those guides out. All right, I'm gonna check out some more questions here. All right, so Brown Guy Made IT, he says, I've been shooting music videos for 6 years, and I've just started charging over $1,000. Yeah, so I mean, that's awesome that you're charging over $1,000 now. That's a fantastic place to be. Yeah, for doing it for over 6 years, you should have started charging that much sooner. There, year one, you should have been charging at least $1,000 for your time. I would say if you're just charging $1,000 now and you've been doing it for 6 years and you feel like your skill set is pretty good and you have the gear and equipment to do the job, you have a decent camera and lights, definitely start charging more than that. Just double it and see what the next client does. You could do it on a new client. It's usually not a good idea to just raise your prices on a current client, and if you do, you're going to have to explain why you're raising your prices. You could tell them, hey, I haven't raised my prices in a long time. I've been doing great work for you at a great price, but my skills have improved. I've got tons of upgrades in my equipment. Unfortunately, to keep up with that, I'm going to have to kind of increase my charge. So if it's a current client, I wouldn't double it, but maybe you could go up 20%, 40, 50% and start charging $1,500 if it's a current client. If it's a brand new client, just send out that estimate for maybe $2,000 and see what they do. You'll be surprised how many people will accept those, and those that don't are probably not clients you want to work with anyways, because you want people that value your skills and hard work. All right, so let's keep going here. Okay, so Ty, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Towie, he says, what's a tip for stability? Because I'm a teen and want to do this as a job when I'm an adult. What's a tip for camera stability? Yeah, so like I was saying at the very beginning of this, one of my first tips was don't go handheld right off when you're just getting started because your footage is going to be way too shaky. Just get a tripod. It's the very first piece of stabilization gear that I bought. I bought just a simple Manfrotto tripod that I still have to this day and use all the time. You can get fantastic looking shots just on a standard tripod. And then once you feel comfortable with videography and getting a good shot and good framing and good lighting with a tripod, try switching to something else like the glide cam. That's where I went next. Or you could get a gimbal, something like that, and start getting some of those smooth motions. So that's what I'd recommend. All right. See what else you guys are asking about down here. All right, Brown Guy Made IT. Sorry, the name's really long. I always messed up. He says, keep footage 60 days after release. I delete that. And he says, all listed in my production agreements. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, if you let your clients know, hey, I only hang on to the raw footage for 60 days. If you want it, you're going to have to get it from me on another hard drive, or I'm going to have to load it up to Google Drive or Dropbox or something for you because I delete it. That's fair. For me, I don't do that. I have stuff from a long time ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, because I'd like to have it for my own use. A lot of times there'll be something where I'm making a video and I realize, oh, I have shots of that. Whatever it is, it might be a client job that's like, hey, I happen to shoot in that part of town or at this restaurant or whatever it is. And I realize, hey, I have that raw footage that I own and I can use. Another reason that I hang on to all that raw footage is because you can sell it as royalty or as stock footage. And I'm going to make an entire video about that, but I've uploaded a lot of clips to stock footage websites where I make money. And I'll wake up in the morning and I'll look at my email and I'll go, hey, I sold a clip last night. That's awesome. And sometimes they sell for 20 bucks, 30 bucks, 50 bucks. It just kind of depends on where it's sold and what the clip is. Now, I don't make a ton of money doing that, but this is a great way for videographers to make money online, is upload all of your good quality shots to stock footage websites. Now, in your agreement with your client, you got to make sure that you have a paragraph in there that talks about stock footage and that how whatever you capture with them may be sold as stock footage. So they're going to have to release that footage to you and allow you to do that, and sign model releases and possibly property releases as well, so that you can actually upload them to those sites. All right. Focus peaking is a must. Yes, if you're trying to get sharp focus, it's a huge help. All right. Oh, okay. I see your name. Brown guy made it. Okay, not IT. All right. And then let's see. Shiv, what's up? He says, what gear can I use to improve my audio? So I guess that just depends on what gear you're currently using for recording audio. Whatever you're currently using, if it's just like an onboard shotgun microphone on top of your camera, that's definitely a step up from using the internal audio, but it's not good enough, because usually even if you're a couple feet away from a shotgun mic on top of a camera, it's going to pick up that entire room audio and sound really echoey. So if that's what you're going from, maybe pick up a lavalier set. I find that they're absolutely the most useful, especially if you do a lot of client work and a lot of interviews. The lavalier is the best thing to use, or a shotgun microphone that you can get right over their head. But that usually requires a boom operator or an entire another stand and everything like that to get it out. So it just depends on what kind of microphones you're using. But hopefully that kind of helps answer your question. All right, let's keep going here. Let's talk about tip number 4 now. So shooting in 30 or 60 frames per second is a newbie mistake that I see quite frequently. There are times to shoot in 30 or 60 frames per second, but that really just depends on what you're shooting. So typically I like to shoot at 24 frames per second because that's a nice standard frame rate. The 30 and 60 frames per second are usually if you want to shoot in slow motion or broadcast. Broadcast television is usually in 60 frames per second or 59.9i interlaced. So there are some times when you want to shoot at a higher frame rate so you can slow it down like 120 or 240 frames per second and get it nice and slow. But if you're just shooting a normal talking head like I am here, I'm shooting in 24 frames per second. It looks the most cinematic, and it's what most films are shot in. So that's a newbie mistake I see all the time, is just shooting in the totally wrong frame rate. All right. So checking out more of the questions we got going on here. All right. So, all right. We're talking about using an on-camera shotgun mic from Rode, or if you want to record off-camera, a Zoom H4n. Yeah, that's great. The Zooms are fantastic. It's a great way that it has, all those XLR plugins, and you could just plug right into a board. So if you're filming a wedding or something like we were talking about earlier, you can plug into an audio out there and get all the microphones that everyone's using, the pastor or whatever it is, and the bride and stuff. Or you can plug in a lavalier microphone into those a lot of times and get fantastic audio. So yeah, that's definitely helpful. And Mal, what's up? He says, can I do a filmmaking equipment giveaway? Yeah, definitely in the future, as I get some different equipment. A lot of times I'm working with companies to do reviews and things like that. I'll see if I can get any more demo equipment or something that I can do a giveaway in the future. As the channel kind of grows, I'll definitely be doing more of that. We're still just growing and getting started here, and I appreciate all you guys watching. It's a lot of fun, and it's great to have the support. So yes, definitely in the future. All right, so Karthik, what's up? He says, how much does a full frame sensor matter for bokeh? So using full frame sensors definitely helps a lot for getting a very blurred out background. It's definitely the easiest way, but it's not totally necessary. You can get a nice blurred out background with a crop sensor camera. Like right now, I'm using the Sony a6500, and I'm pretty close to the lens, and I'm shooting at 1.4, and you can tell my background is pretty blurry. The camera back there, that's the Blackmagic Pocket 6K. It's very, very blurred out, and so is kind of the wall and everything. But this is a crop sensor. But a huge factor in making your images look really nice and blurry and have that great bokeh is, of course, having a fast lens that can go wide open. So it needs to at least be f2.8 or wider. 1.8 or 1.5 or whatever is definitely going to be even more ideal if you really want a blurred out background. And then making sure that you're shooting more on the macro side of the lens, meaning that your subject is closer to the camera and lens, because the closer they get, the more blurred out the background gets. If your subject was standing against this back wall, so like right now I'm shooting at f1.4, wide open on this lens, but if I was standing against the back wall and it focused on me, it wouldn't be blurred out at all. There'd be no blur, there'd be no bokeh or anything like that. So a huge trick is, if you want that blurred out background, get your subject and camera as close together as possible with the background as far away as possible and get as wide open as possible. So no, you don't have to have full frame to get a really blurred out background. I mean, they've been making movies for like 100+ years now on Super 35 sensors that are smaller than full frame, and they get beautiful blurred out backgrounds. A full frame just helps and accentuates it even more. All right. A couple more questions here. So, mind over matter. Okay, I see your username now. At first, when I read that, I didn't understand it because the letters are all off. Okay, mind over matter says, how did you get 1,000 subs? And I think he's talking to Anmol. I'll let you guys answer that down in the comments. But basically, my quick answer to that is just keep uploading videos consistently and working on it, and you'll eventually grow that audience. All right. John, what's up? He says, just got in. Which aperture do you use for B-roll, say tattoo shop and tattooing? Yeah, so you don't have to use a specific aperture for everything that you shoot, but I would say if you're doing tattoos and things like that, you probably don't want to be shooting totally wide open at like f1.8, because depending on your angle, you may only get a portion of it in focus, because usually you only have like 1 inch of focus. And let's say it's a large tattoo, like 6 inches or whatever, it's covering a whole arm or something. You're going to want to be shooting more at like f2.8, f4, f5.6, so that you can really get all of that art in focus. And if you're not really going to be getting a really blurred out background when you're shooting tattoos anyways, because they're probably laying on a table or something and there's a table right underneath them, or the rest of their body's right underneath them if you're really close up on the shot or whatever. So I wouldn't worry too much about having a really blurred out background and a wide open aperture for that. Just make sure that all of the art, all the ink is in focus. And usually you can do that around f4, f5.6 or something like that. So hopefully that helps. Obviously, tattoo shops a lot of times are darker, kind of have a mood and a vibe to them. So maybe bring some lights if you're going to be shooting at a tighter down aperture. All right. Couple more questions. And Molly says, can you suggest some tips to reduce the color noise in a footage, because I face a lot of problem? All right, so I think what you're saying is that you get just a lot of noise in your footage, and sometimes that grain and noise is colorful. Really, the best way to reduce that noise is, if you're going to do it in post-production, is with a few different plugins. One of them is called, I believe, Neat Video, and that can get rid of noise. It is something you have to pay for. I think it's around $100 or something, but there are a couple different ones. You can just look up noise reduction software plugins, something like that on Google. There's a handful of them out there that do a pretty good job of reducing the noise. But honestly, if you want to reduce noise, the best thing to do is give your camera light. Cameras and sensors love light. The more light you give them, the sharper your image is. You'll notice that when you're shooting in kind of a dark scenario, that things look a little mushy and a little bit soft. It's because there's not enough light. The more light you give it, like when you're out, on a bright sunny day, that bright sunny day may not look as good as a nice golden hour, but things are really sharp and crisp because of so much light. So add more light to your scene, open up as much as you can, and you'll find that you're getting a lot less noise in your footage. All right, so let's move on to tip number 5. This is the newbie mistake that I see pretty often, and that is the wrong white balance. So if you don't understand cameras very well yet, or maybe you're doing photography and you've been shooting in RAW, you might accidentally set the wrong white balance. So what you want to do is always use a custom white balance. Get used to using custom white balance and memorize what the different Kelvin temperatures are. So if you're shooting out in daylight, it's typically 5600 Kelvin, and most cameras, modern cameras, will allow you to set that custom. And if you're shooting indoors, usually it's around 3200 Kelvin if they're using tungsten light bulbs. But it depends on where you are. If you're shooting in an office and working with, a corporate client, there's a really good chance that they have fluorescent light bulbs overhead, and you're going to want to be shooting at around 4000 Kelvin, maybe 4500 Kelvin, and those usually have a bit of a green tint to them. So that's a huge mistake that I see a lot of videographers make, is when they're starting out, they just set the wrong white balance. And then later on in post-production, when you're editing, you're trying to fix that white balance and make it look more true and get the skin tones looking better. And it usually basically degrades the quality of your footage more and more. The more you color grade your footage, usually the more noise it introduces, and the more compression that it introduces, and the more banding. So you want to get your white balance correct in camera as much as you can, even when I'm shooting in B-RAW. So when I'm shooting on the Pocket 6K back here, it can shoot in B-RAW, Blackmagic RAW, and that allows you to change the color temperature later. Well, that's awesome, and it's a great tool, but to tell the truth, I'm always shooting at an accurate white balance, or at least as close as I can be. So even if you know you can set the white balance later on in post-production, just get it right in camera, because even getting the wrong white balance can affect the way that you expose your image and everything like that, and the way that you light it. So really important to get that right in camera. And that's something that I see a lot of people make mistakes on, me, myself included. That's why all these, top 10 tips of, mistakes people make and how to improve them. I pretty much made all these mistakes when I started out. I remember I filmed an entire wedding outdoors. It was outdoors. This is when I first started it, and I was getting good practice. I filmed it all in daylight balance, but all the lights in the backyard were tungsten. There were all those warm string lights in the backyard that were 3200 Kelvin, or maybe even warmer, around 2500 Kelvin. But I shot the whole thing in daylight balance, and I delivered it to the customer with a completely wrong white balance. So everyone's skin looked extra warm and orangey, and surprisingly, they didn't care. They didn't even notice that it was completely off. Because they probably didn't know enough about cameras and video work for them to even notice or care. But months and months later, I remember going back and looking at that footage and going, oh, this looks terrible. What is this? And I realized this is all shot at the wrong white balance. And I never fixed it, and I delivered it at the wrong white balance. So I went in later and just fixed a couple of the clips just so I could see what it looked like. And I was like, oh, that looks so much better. Oh my goodness. So don't make that mistake, and definitely don't deliver wrong white balance stuff to your customer. But it happens. It does happen. I've done it before. So all right, let's see what some other questions we got going here. Samuel Navarro Gonzalez, what's up? He says, do you have any suggestions for fog machines or hazers? Yeah, that's a great question. There's actually some really good ones out there. I'm going to pull one up right now really quick, so I can just tell you exactly which one it is. It's a pretty affordable hazer. If you're going to get a really nice hazer, usually that is a Rosco hazer. You can look them up. There's different versions of them, but they're at least $1,000, sometimes more. So if you don't have the money to spend on that, I wouldn't recommend getting the Rosco. But the one that works pretty well, and it's a simple hazer, it's called the Chavette. And I'll try and drop a link to it down in the description here, or down in the comments. It's the Chavette Hurricane Haze, and it's like $330 on Amazon, which is pretty reasonable for a decent hazer. So I just dropped the link in there. And right now, I just use a basic fog machine. I think I picked it up on Amazon for about $50, but that's a good hazer right there. And the thing about just using a normal fog machine is you want to wisp it around the room, get a card or, a 5-in-1 reflector or something, and kind of fan it around the room so that it's not like billowing in clouds. You want it to get really hazy. That's why hazer is much better than a fog machine for filmmaking, because fog creates these big clouds and billows that are noticeable, where haze just puts kind of an even film or even atmosphere throughout the entire image. It doesn't look like there's smoke floating around the room. So yeah, that's a good cheap hazer. All right. Let's see what other questions we got here. All right, so John says, if you're shooting in 24 frames per second, and you have the 180 degree shutter roll, can you use higher shutter like 60 and can slow-mo on post, or should it be 60p at 120 shutter? I hope I'm understanding that correctly, but basically if you're doing 24 frames per second, you're not going to be slowing that down later on in post-production, so you're going to keep it at 48 shutter speed. But if you're shooting at 60 frames per second, you'll definitely be shooting at a 120 degree shutter roll, because now it's doubled and you're going to get the correct motion blur. Sometimes you can raise your shutter speed a little bit higher than 180 degrees. Let's say that you're trying to get really smooth slow motion for like sports and action, and you don't want a lot of blur. Say you're filming like a football game, or someone riding a motorcycle or something, you want it to be really crisp and not have any blur, then you could crank up your shutter speed a little bit past the 180 degree shutter roll to give it even more crisp of an image. That's not a terrible thing to do, but I would only do that if I'm going to be slowing it down later on. If you play that back at normal speed in a 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second timeline, it's going to look strange and jittery. So you can only really crank that shutter speed up if you're going to slow it down later so it looks nice and smooth. Don't play back at normal speed because it'll look really strange and jittery. Hopefully that answers your question. And yeah, I appreciate all the comments, guys. Keep them coming. I'll try and answer them as we keep going here. So let's get on to the next mistake, or the next pro tip here. And this is tip number 6, moving the camera nonstop. So I see a lot of newbies when they start doing filmmaking that they just keep moving the camera around, and they pan, to the left and to the right, and they tilt up and down, and they're zooming in and out. They're just constantly moving the camera around. And the key here is to hold the shot. Hold the shot for 5 to 10 seconds minimum, because you are going to regret it later in the edit when you only have like 2 seconds of a shot that's actually steady and not shaky and it's framed up, and you can't use it because 2 seconds may not be good enough for your edit. So I always recommend in your head, be mentally counting, okay, I need this piece of B-roll. Let's say I'm filming a commercial for a restaurant, okay, and you're filming someone, I don't know, flipping burgers or preparing food. Hold the camera steady for 5 seconds if you can. That's not even long enough, because you might have been a little shaky at the beginning of recording, and you might be a little bit shaky when you hit stop at the end. Hold it for 10 seconds, honestly, or more, 10, 15 seconds. Hold the shot and just let the action unfold. And once you've got the action, it's unfolded, cut your clip. And later on, you're going to thank yourself, because the client might be like, hey, can you extend that a little bit? I really liked seeing that burger flip scene with the fire and the juicy meat or whatever. And you're like, yeah, about that. I can't extend the clip because it's only 5 seconds long, and you'll just totally shoot yourself in the foot there. So make it longer, 10, 15 seconds or longer if you can, because you're going to need it later. And I've personally made that mistake before. People being like, hey, can you do this and that with the edit? And it's like, nope, can't do it. So hold your shot. That's a huge newbie mistake that I see all the time, is people just not holding their shot. So be sure to do that, because later on in the edit, you're going to be thanking yourself, and just keep it steady. Don't move around so much. I know we all have ADD and we get distracted, but that's really a common mistake, is just not getting the footage long enough. All right. All right. So Soman Bizwaz, what's up? It says, I like your video, learning a lot of things. Please tell me, I have the Sony FS5 camcorder body. So what kind of lens you use is good? He says, I live in New York. The Sony FS5 is a great camera. We have 2 of them at work that we use frequently. Excuse me. I love that camera. It's fantastic for a lot of work. It has 2 XLR inputs, built-in ND filters, a really long battery life. That's a great camera. I would say good lenses for that. Definitely get one good zoom lens for that, because that's a great camera for zooming in and out and getting your framing exactly how you want it, especially for live events and live productions and things like that. Great camera for that. Get a decent zoom lens that can open up to f2.8 or wider. Anything more stop down than that, like f4 on the FS5, I find is just too dark for my taste. We have a couple zoom lenses that are f4, the Sony ones, and I think they're 18 to 105s, and they just never are bright enough. We're always cranking our ISO up to like 3200, 6400, and on those cameras, they don't do well in low light, and you have to crank the ISO a lot, and they get a lot of noise. So I'd recommend getting the widest aperture lenses that you can. And actually, my last live stream that I did on this channel was all about the best lenses to get. I'll leave a link for you so that you can check it out and watch a little bit more on that, because there's a lot of great information in there on lenses. So be sure to go check that one out after this live stream. All right. Couple more questions here we'll get to in just a minute. Let's get to the 7th tip here, and that is too many lens flares. So I see a lot of new filmmakers get out there and right away they go, man, these lens flares are so cool, they look so pretty. And I don't disagree, I do love lens flares, but you must use them sparingly. If you have too many lens flares, it can look way too stylized or even amateur. Like, why is there all this light and this glare coming in? So be sure to just use lens flares tactically. A huge newbie mistake that I see and a lot of people make, and I've just seen people do this, is they don't use a lens hood. And even right now I'm shooting, in my office studio, and I have a lens hood on the camera. And you're like, well, why would you use that? Well, because my key light is right here. It's only a foot away from my face, but some of this may spill into the light, into the lens, and then wash it out and make it look more flat and have less contrast. So always, 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 I always recommend use a lens hood or use a matte box so that it allows your image to have much better contrast instead of it washing out. Because if it washes out from lens flares or lights hitting the lens, it's really hard to bring that contrast back later in post. And if you can bring it back later in post, by crushing down the blacks and getting that contrast back, it can kind of, again, degrade the quality of the image. So always use a lens hood. I see people just leave them in their Pelican cases or leave them at home and they just don't have them on their lenses, but there's a reason for them there. People have been using them for over 100 years on cameras, so don't make that newbie mistake. All right. John, he says, thanks for giving your time. You subbed before. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. Everyone counts. All right. So Sun Devil Thor, what's up, man? You're back in the live stream. I always appreciate you jumping in. I've seen you in here a couple times. It's great to have recurring people visiting with me. So it's a lot of fun. Doubt that you'll have time to jump on since you're working, but will you put a recap on YouTube later? Yeah, so this video is going to post later, and I'm going to put timestamps for each of these 10 different tips, and you can just jump right to them as we kind of narrow them down. So get back to work, and you can jump on this stream later and get those 10 tips. Just jump to the different time codes. All right. That random bird, hey, what's up? Says, I love making skits and short films, but I can't come up with ideas. Do you have any ideas, or do you have any tips on coming up with good film ideas? Yeah, so that is one of my biggest challenges personally as well. I can 100% relate with you there. I love making skits and short films and things like that as well. It's what we love to do, right? Us that love using cameras and lights and filming and editing stories together. I think it's a passion that a lot of us have, but sometimes we have that creative block where we're just like, hey, I can make this stuff. I'm technically good, but I can't think of the ideas. I struggle with that frequently. So a lot of times I ask myself the same question, like, man, I can't come up with any good ideas. Like, I'm not a good writer. And that's, I think, where you're probably struggling, is you're just not, you haven't honed in your writing skills yet. So I'm still trying to figure out how to master that one myself. But I guess my quick answer would be find friends that like writing. So I actually have a couple friends, 1 or 2 close friends that love to write, and they write a lot of short stories, and they some of them have written an entire full-length feature films, huge scripts that are 100+ pages. So find some friends around you that like to write those stories, and then you guys can collaborate together to make those films. So there are a ton of filmmakers out there that don't write at all, but they are fantastic filmmakers, directors, or directors of photography, but they partner with fantastic writers and producers and things like that. So try and find some close friends around you, or friends online. You can, find people in forums, on Reddit, a lot of Facebook groups that are all about filmmaking, and just say, hey, I love making videos. If you're in my area and you're interested in making some short films, do you have any stories or ideas that you've been sitting on and been in a book and you want to make? And you'd be surprised how many people in those Facebook groups are like, yeah, I have this story, but I just don't have any equipment, or I don't have a team to work with, and they'd love to work together. That's the biggest thing about filmmaking, is that as you do it more, that you realize the more that you have to collaborate, because it's really hard to do this as a one-man band. A lot of times I find myself working alone and doing these things, but when I can work on a team, I find that the production quality is just so much better, and the end product is so much better. So if you're like me, not good at writing, find a friend that can write. And if you want to learn writing, there's courses online you can take. You can read books on writing and things like that if you have the time to do it. So hopefully that answers your question. Thanks for that. So yeah, Link, he says, matte boxes make you look more professional. That's true. They do. I personally use them mostly because I can add ND filters into them and everything like that, and they block the sun flares and everything like that. That's kind of the main reason I use them, of course, for their actual function, but they definitely make you look more professional, and it helps people around you realize that you're making a video. I can't tell you how many times I've been on set when I'm not using a matte box and people think, you're taking photos. Is it okay if I walk through real quick? And I'm like, no, don't walk through. I'm taking a video, so yeah, it makes a huge difference. People realize, that's a video camera, because they recognize it. They see it on TV. They see it in movies. They know what a video camera looks like. But because most of us use hybrid cameras like the Sony A7S or, some of the different Canon cameras or the GH5, they look like photography cameras because usually they are photography cameras as well. They're hybrids. So people just don't get that. But when you throw that matte box on there, they start to realize, it's video. And it makes the client obviously more impressed, which is always good because they'll pay more if you have more professional equipment, right? At least that's the hope. So let's keep moving on here. Let's get on to our tip number 8. So gimbal all day, every day. So I will see people when they first start out doing videography, they will buy a gimbal. So one of the first things that they purchase, and it'll end up being all gimbal footage, but they don't realize that there's other ways to stabilize your footage besides using a gimbal. So that's just a cardinal mistake that I see a lot of newbies make. They go, this is awesome. I can walk around, I can move, I can get smooth footage. You're right. You definitely can, but go watch a film or a TV show, and you'll realize that it's not very frequent that they're using the gimbal. It's usually very selective. A lot of times they're just on a tripod or on a dolly, which basically you can mimic with a slider, depending on how long the shot is. And you can do just about everything you need to on a tripod and a slider. But for those moments where you gotta follow the character down a hallway or through the forest or whatever, you're gonna need a gimbal. But when there's times that you don't need a gimbal, don't use a gimbal. I'll see guys be like, I can hold it really steady, and it'll, instead of using a tripod. You can't. You could get it pretty steady, but you can't get it 100% solid. It'll end up having a little bit of that bobbing up and down, or kind of swing left or right a little bit as you kind of twist your hands, and it just doesn't look as good as having a solid locked off shot. So avoid that newbie mistake. Don't always think, hey, I'm going to go film a video, I'm just going to throw it on my gimbal. To tell the truth, don't tell anyone this, my gimbal's been in that closet for at least 3 months. I haven't pulled it out in maybe 3 or more months. Like, honestly, I don't know how long it's been. It's been a while. Well, let's see. The lockdown's been going on for 3 months, and I haven't used it all during then. So it's probably 4 or 5 months since I've used my gimbal. It's a tool that you need, obviously, for different things, but you don't always need it. So just get used to using a good tripod, a good slider. I definitely prefer a shoulder rig or going handheld with a good built-out rig if you can. The gimbal is, it's a great tool, but it's really just use it selectively. Don't use it for everything because it can be very obvious with how electronic it is and how bobby it is. I would say don't make it your main go-to thing every single time you pull out your camera, because you'll find that you're moving the camera for no reason. And there's no story driving the reason to moving that camera around. So that's a mistake I see pretty frequently. All right. See what's else going on down here. Lauren, hey, what's up? Thanks for joining the live. She says, I just got a Fuji X-T4. Should I invest in Fuji lens, or will other lenses work just as well on it? That's a really good question. So I had the same question. This is my first time shooting on a Fuji, and I don't have any Fuji lenses yet. And so I was like, man, should I start buying a bunch of Fuji lenses? But the honest truth is that I haven't bought any Fuji lenses yet. I'm adapting all of my Canon glass. And if you watched my Fuji X-T4 camera build video, if that brought you to the channel, you'll see in there that I just use a simple little adapter that allows me to throw my Canon glass on there. So basically all my lenses are the Rokinon Cine DS Prime lenses that I simply adapt. And because I'm shooting video most of the time, it's okay for me to be doing manual focus. If you're going to do a lot of photography, Lauren, it's a really good chance that you're going to want to buy a native Fujifilm lens, because with photography, you're going to use autofocus much, much more. And you want to be able to just quickly snap those pictures and make sure they're really in focus. And even if you use an adapter, like let's say the Metabones one or another electronic adapter, the autofocus isn't going to be nearly as good as just mounting a native lens. So maybe buy one good Fujifilm native lens if you want good autofocus. And I still plan on getting at least one good Fujifilm lens so that I can play with the autofocus, test it out for you guys, and of course use it for photography and some of my gimbal work when I do use a gimbal. So hopefully that answers your question. But if you have glass that you can adapt, definitely adapt it. And when it comes time that you need something with good autofocus, buy a native Fuji mount lens. Whew, doing a lot of talking here. We're coming up on almost an hour. I want to wrap this up for you guys soon, but we still have 3 more tips, and then we'll get it going. So let's move on here to tip number 9. Oh, we already did 8. Tip number 9. Okay, only 2 more. So number 9, not getting close enough. So this is a mistake that I see a lot of new filmmakers make, is that they'll just set up their camera, kind of frame it up, and they're like, oh, I got the shot. There we go. But you need to fill the frame. You've probably heard this before. Fill the frame. So basically what I do when I'm framing up a shot and I know what my subject is, whatever it is, I try to get them to almost touch the edge of every side, if it's right. So you want to completely fill it. You can see just in this simple shot here, my head's pretty much touching the top, and I've got some space here on the sides, but that gives me room to talk with my hands in these lives and everything like that. But you want to fill it. If I was way back here, I'll scoot back here for a sec. It's just not going to look right. And I see that mistake all the time, is that people will just throw their camera up and it's like, no, now I can't see the person, like get closer, moving closer. So that's what I love about using prime lenses, is they don't even allow you to zoom in. You actually have to move the camera and you get closer to the subject. So definitely fill your frame. And this is a great photography tip as well. If you do a lot of photography, you want to get pretty much, as close as you can usually, and get everything inside of the frame nice and close. If you feel like, wow, there's too much space over here on the top or the side, you're not in close enough. You haven't filled the frame enough. You don't want any of that empty space. You want your audience to know exactly where to look, and you do that by filling the frame with the right thing, either dead center, whoa, hitting the mic there, either dead center or using the rule of thirds or whatever it is. make sure that your audience knows exactly where to look by filling the frame. All right. So I'm going to check out a couple more of your guys' questions here, and then we'll move on to our final and 10th tip of the night. All right. So Anmal says, tips for making stop motion videos, shooting and editing. So I've done a handful of stop motion videos. I don't do a lot of them because they are a lot of work. But if you haven't done one before, basically you want to get your camera on a tripod, make sure it's extremely tight, locked off. Don't change the focus. Don't change the zoom. Don't touch it. Just release the shutter if you can. If you have a remote shutter release, do that so that the camera doesn't shake or move at all, because you'll have to go and fix that later on in production. That's tip number one. Get the camera locked off. Never touch it again if you can. And then just take your photos, move your object, whatever it is, take a photo. Move your object, take a photo. And you, depending on how many frames you need, you might be doing that hundreds of times or a few thousand times. Just really depends, but it's a huge amount of patience. And there's different calculators online. Definitely Google it, but you can Google stop motion calculators that allow you to know how many frames you need. So let's say you're making a 30-second clip. You're like, hey, I want 30 seconds of stop motion and I want it to be in 24 frames per second. Well, it'll allow you to do the math for you, and it'll tell you how many frames you need to fill that up. And then once you get to editing, you just drop all those photos into your timeline. And usually, depending on what you're using, release and Final Cut, you can grab every single photo in the entire timeline, and then you could do a change duration on it. And I just set each one to 1 frame. And then it'll shrink down really small, and it'll play each of those photos as 1 frame only, and it'll look really nice and smooth, and it'll look like it was a video because it's 1 frame. So in 1 second, you'll see 24 frames. So that's my quick tip on doing stop motion. I don't do a ton of it, but it is fun when you have the time and patience to do it. So hopefully that helps. All right, let's keep going here. Samuel Naharo, he says, do you have a suggestion for an affordable wireless setup for a first AC? Yeah, so I made an entire video on this as well on the channel. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but I will link it down below right now. You can go check it out. But it's all about a first AC setup, and it's decently affordable, but you can do this same thing with a different wireless transmitter. So let me drop that down below. You can check that out. But Hollyland makes some really great wireless transmitters, and I believe it's the Mars 400 that is probably one of the most affordable. It's a little over $400. I think it's like $420, $450, but it's very reliable, gets you up to 400 feet of connection, and it can do HDMI. And it's just a really great one. If you want the top of the line, you're going to do Teradek, but obviously you said something affordable, so don't do Teradek. I would say Hollyland is probably my favorite one right now, and I actually have an entire new review coming out for them on something that just works with the app, and that's the Mars X. So if you want to just use it with a phone and have someone pull focus, you could even do that, and it's much cheaper. I believe it's only $180. That's the Mars X, so you could definitely go check that out. All right, let's get on to our 10th tip now. So I see people shooting boring, inanimate objects too often. So people will get out there and shoot a video of something completely still or almost completely still, and it just looks like a photo. That's fine if you're doing photography, but if you are doing video work, you want to follow the action and get a lot of shot diversity. So definitely make sure that whatever you're shooting looks alive and looks like it's video. The best thing to do, of course, if you can, is have a person in it, and that adds the most interest. But if you're shooting architecture, this is going to be much more difficult. If you're doing real estate videos and stuff, I don't think that tip necessarily applies, because nothing's really going to be moving in the frame except possibly the camera on a slider or a gimbal. But otherwise, if you're not shooting architecture, that aside, even if you're shooting landscape, you want to make sure you have some plants moving in it. A lot of times I will actually shake a bush or a tree branch or whatever. I'll get my lens set up, and then I will shake the branch out of the shot so that it's moving in it, and it looks really cool. And maybe if it's fall, the leaves are falling off or flowers are falling off or whatever it is. So try to avoid shooting boring, inanimate objects. Instead, animate those objects, like animating that tree branch or flowers or whatever it is. So if you have to shoot them, a lot of times you're shooting weddings and you want to shoot the plants and the greenery and stuff. Well, I will just like, if it's a flower that I'm shooting, I'll just pull on it and let it just go and kind of move in the shot. And then it looks great. So definitely, if you're avoiding or if you're shooting inanimate objects, try to animate them in some way, give them a push, whatever it is, and get them animated. Otherwise, just don't shoot them at all. Shoot a subject if you can, because those boring inanimate objects definitely make you look like a noob, and you don't want to look like you're doing photography when it's video. So those are the 10 tips to improve your camera skills when you're out there doing videography and filmmaking. I hope that was helpful. I'm going to take a few minutes here to just answer any final questions, and then we'll be wrapping this up for you guys. I appreciate everyone hopping into the live stream tonight, all the questions. It's very late for a lot of people, so appreciate that. Lauren says, thanks. Yes, that's what led me here. She said, I'm currently in college studying film, but I feel like I'm mostly learning what great filmmaking is, but not a lot of technical skills on how to do it. Hopefully my classes will get there. But are there any online classes you recommend I take, or the best ways to learn? Yeah. So, yeah, Lauren, that's a great observation and a great question. So earlier in the live stream, we talked about whether or not you should go to film school. It sounds like you're going to college studying film, so you may not, I don't know, would you call that film school? Maybe your degree is in film, but it's not a film school. I don't know. Anyways, so we talked about that earlier, and I think for some people, it's a great route if you like to do more traditional in-class learning from a professor and having assignments and homework and stuff like that. If you like it very regimented, then going to film school is a great way to do it. But as I was saying earlier in the live stream, I have met a ton of film school graduates that come out and they're not very good. They didn't really practice their talent or their skill much at all. And it sounds like that's a lot of what you're getting right now, is just learning what's great film. And I hear that from so many people in film school saying, oh, we studied Hitchcock and we studied Citizen Kane and whatever. They studied all these really famous movies. And it's like, okay, you come out a film buff and you know who the great directors are, but did you learn how to use a camera? Did you learn how to edit? Did you learn how to get good audio and lighting? So if you're not getting that in class, well, definitely recommend getting out there on set and doing productions with friends and for local businesses and clients and things like that in your off hours when you can, or during the summer when you're not in school. Get out there and practice, put it to work instead of just learning the technical side and learning what good films look like in class. Get out there and just get your hands dirty, because that is the best way to learn. I've improved so much by just getting on set and doing it. Of course, there are many tutorials online that you can watch. There are a lot of different great ones. If you're not familiar with him, go check out the Hurlbut Academy. I'm going to put that in the chat here for you. You probably have, try to spell it correctly, but Google Hurlbut Academy. I'd say that is the best, most hands-on one if you're interested in doing camera work and lighting work, if you want to be basically a director of photography or the DP. He has fantastic tutorials online that teach you how to light and how to work with actors and what equipment to bring and stuff like that. It's so much more hands-on than a lot of film schools. There's also the Buff Nerd. I'll put that in the chat. He just released an entire really good hands-on filmmaking course as well that goes beyond just kind of the curriculum side of it. So go check them out. They're pretty good. All right. Emnal says, please do a stream on Instagram also so that we can also join you in a video call. I've never done that before. Can you do that on Instagram? Do they do video calls with multiple people? That'd be kind of cool. I'll have to try that sometime. Unfortunately, Instagram only lets you go live using your phone. And that's a bummer because the camera on the front-facing camera on these aren't very good and the audio is not very good. So that's why I do it on YouTube. I'm using a professional camera, lights, and microphone and everything. So, but maybe in the future I'll do kind of a lower grade, lower tech live stream just on Instagram. That'd be fun. All right. Couple final questions here. Dan says, I have a Sony a6000 with a kit lens. What should my next lens be? Yeah, great question. So a lot of people, when they're first getting started, they buy the camera with the kit lens. And I did the same thing. I bought the Canon Rebel T3i with their 18 to 55 millimeter lens, and I believe it was f4 to f5.6. So as you zoomed in, the aperture closed down more. Kit lenses are the worst. I hate them. There's very few good cameras with a good kit lens. There are some. I can't say there aren't any good ones. There are some that come with a decent kit lens, but for the most part, on your next camera buy, just buy the camera body. Never buy a kit lens again. Again, if you can avoid it. I've never bought one since, and I bought many cameras since. Don't buy a kit lens again. Sell your kit lens if you can. Get the $50 out of it if you can, and get a good, probably 50 millimeter lens that can shoot at f1.8 or f2.8, because 50 millimeters is one of the best focal lengths for getting really standard, good talking headshots with a nice blurred out background. That's what I'd recommend. That was the first lens that I bought after a kit lens, and I still use the 50 millimeter lens all the time. I would definitely recommend picking one up. The nifty 50, as they say. I'm sure you've heard. All right, so Lauren says, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. My parents just really wanted me to go to college first. Yeah, I get that. Parents definitely have their expectations, and they're like, oh, you want to do film? That's nice. That's nice. You want to do art? Okay, you know how it is. They're like, why isn't she going to become a doctor or a lawyer or whatever? Well, if you're going to do film, you got to go to school. Yeah, I get that. And that's fine. If your parents are taking care of it and helping pay for it or whatever it is, that's awesome. If you're going into a lot of debt for it and they're like, you need to go, but you're going into a bunch of debt for it, maybe rethink it if you're not getting what you want out of it before you're crazy in debt. But I'm not going to give you college advice. I went to school for business, and I took a few filmmaking classes, some videography classes, and photo design classes and that kind of stuff, graphic design classes. And it was a lot of fun to learn that stuff on the side, but I prefer the business side. And then I can just learn all the filmmaking stuff for free online or through books or magazines or videos and courses and things like that. The Hurlbut Academy and stuff. So yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag there, but I think film school is good for some people. So enjoy your time in school. I loved those years. They're done now. I'm done. And now I got a big student loan. So, all right. Trying to wrap this up for you guys so we can all go to bed soon. Soman, well, I guess some of you guys on the other side of the world, it's the middle of the day, but Soman says, I have another question. Please tell me Sony FS5 good video settings because I'm a new user and need RAW update and an external monitor. That's a good question. I would say definitely just shoot in 4K at 24 frames per second on that camera. And if you need the RAW update, I have to look into that. We don't shoot on RAW on our Sony FS5. I know you can. There are some updates for it. And if you want to shoot externally, pick up an Atomos Ninja V. That is definitely my favorite recorder. It's the best size. And I think you can record RAW on it with the Sony FS5. You'll have to check that out. All right, a couple final questions here. Suicide Squad, what's up? Says, what's the best gimbal for my Fujifilm X-H1? Right off the bat, I'd say the Ronin S. That's still my favorite gimbal out there on the market. I know there's a ton of new ones coming out all the time, like the new Crane, I think it's the Crane 3S, but still the Ronin S has the best software, the best application, and I found that it's really the most sturdy and definitely can hold a good payload like the X-H1 fine. So the Ronin S, I still think is the tried and true, probably one of the best gimbals on the market today, even with new ones coming out. All right, and Miar Kaimo says, could we get some audio tips? Yeah, I'll make a whole video on that in the future. If you go back to my channel and look under editing playlist, I have a couple things on editing audio and things like that, so definitely check it out, but I'll make something all on audio in the future. All right, guys, so thank you so much for joining the live stream tonight. Hopefully those 10 tips to improve your camera skills will be helpful for you and you can avoid the newbie mistakes like I made when I started out. Pretty much all of those 10 tips that I shared with you today, I've pretty much made all of those mistakes myself. So hopefully you can avoid them and get out there and keep making great videos and films. It's been so much fun hanging out with y'all. Thank you so much for joining the live stream. Max Soda, what's up? Thanks for joining. I know you're hopping in here at the very end. I'll try and answer some of the questions down in the chat after this is completed, but thank you guys so much. Have a great night, and I'll catch you in the next live stream. And I'll try and do live streams weekly, so I'll catch you guys next week. Have a great night.